Hello and welcome to CEC Online Lectures. In my last lecture, I discussed the fallacies of relevance. In today's lecture, I will explain fallacies of defective induction. You know that fallacies of relevance are committed when the premises are not relevant to the conclusion. However, in the case of fallacies of defective induction, premises are not logically irrelevant to the conclusion. Here we need to remember two things. One, premises are or may be relevant to the conclusion, and two, premises do not give enough reasons to draw a conclusion. So we may say that arguments which commit the fallacy of defective induction, although may have relevant premises, but these premises are weak, insufficient, or inefficient as far as drawing a conclusion is concerned. In our day-to-day life, we do sometimes get swayed and convinced by people who cleverly trap us using such fallacious arguments. So, my purpose here is to make you aware of such defective inductive arguments. Now, there are 4 fallacies included under the label defective induction, and they are argument ad ignorantium, argument ad verecundium, argument non causa pro causa, which is also called false cause, and hasty generalization. So let us take up the first one, which is argument ad ignorantium. It is also called argument from ignorance. It is an informal fallacy in which a conclusion is supported by an illegitimate appeal to ignorance, as when it is supposed that something is likely to be true because we cannot prove that it is false. Understand what this means. A conclusion, say P, is taken to be true because there is no proof that P is false. This can be stated conversely as well. A conclusion P is taken to be false because there is no evidence that P is true. So, schematically put, it has the form there is no evidence to explain not P. Therefore, P is true. Conversely, there is no evidence to prove P. Therefore, P is false. This reasoning is absurd. What is happening here? We are arriving at a definite conclusion from a premise that admits ignorance. So basically, from I'm not sure, I'm concluding I know for sure. You must realize that it is a dangerous kind of reasoning, because if somebody for some reason is unable to prove a culprit wrong, then by this reasoning the culprit will be absolved of all charges and be declared as right. Let us take a few examples, starting with the atheist's argument that God does not exist because there is no conclusive proof for the existence of God. Similarly, someone may say ghosts do not exist because there is no conclusive proof for the existence of ghosts. Now, a person can easily turn these arguments against these people and argue with the same reasoning, which is appeal to ignorance, that no conclusive proof is there to disprove the existence of God. Therefore, God exists. Or nobody can prove that ghosts do not exist. Therefore, ghosts exist. Another example, no one can prove that the world will not end tomorrow. Therefore, the world will end tomorrow. Let us take an example from history. Before Copernicus, it was believed that the sun revolved around the earth. And you must be aware that anybody challenging this theory was severely punished. Now, can you understand the reason why people were punished? because those who maintained this geocentric view, that is, Earth is the center of the solar system and the sun revolves around the Earth, were ignorant. They were operating on the thesis that because we cannot prove the Earth not to be the center of the solar system, therefore Earth is the center of the solar system. Or because we cannot prove that the sun does not revolve around the Earth, therefore the sun revolves around the Earth. Their assumption was perhaps based on the daily observation of sun rising in the east and setting in the west. However, when Copernicus developed a scientific method and demonstrated that it is the Earth that revolves around the sun in almost 365 days, this geocentric argument from ignorance lost its appeal. Let us take another example. You just finished with your exams. One paper didn't go well at all. And if you do not pass all the papers, you won't be able to appear for some important entrance exam. You're worried. You decide to go to a black magician. He looks at your face and tells you, not only will you pass that paper, you will also clear the entrance exam. You go back home and begin to wait for the results. And it so happens that you clear both the exams. Now, what will be your take on this? Will you give the entire credit to the black magician or to yourself? It is no surprise that you will give full credit to the black magician and to his method. But when you tell the sequence of events to your friend, she may not be as convinced as you are because she understands it as just a case of coincidence. However, she remains unsuccessful in explaining to you and refuting your belief in black magic. The inability on the part of your friend to refute your argument is not a sufficient reason to accept your conclusion that you passed because of black magic. So, in argument from ignorance, the burden of proof lies not with the person who makes a claim, but with the opponent. And this is what makes it dangerous. Sometimes this argument from ignorance is taken too far. Consider this argument. It's unimaginable to think that a criminal can be reformed. Therefore, a criminal cannot be reformed. Now, these arguments may seem unreasonable to you now, but don't you think we do make mistakes, such mistakes, while reasoning? So, before I close my discussion on argument ad ignorantium or argument from ignorance, I wish to remind you of a popular slogan which we all must always remember, and that is, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And one last example. Now, Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer who was born in 1546, 3 years after Copernicus died. He agreed that the moon rotated around the earth and all the other planets of our solar system rotated around the sun. But at the same time, he claimed that the sun rotated around the earth. And this claim was based on his observations, which were before the invention of the telescope. Now, Tycho Brahe also claimed that if the earth did rotate around the sun, there would be a stellar parallax every 6 months, which means a shift in the position of the nearby object or star against the background of a faraway object. But no such parallax was ever observed. So, Tycho took the lack of this evidence to be proof that the earth did not rotate around the sun. However, these parallaxes were discovered later and could not be seen earlier because they were too small and needed a telescope. Okay, now we move on to the second fallacy of defective induction, and it is argument ad verecundiam. Argument ad verecundiam is also known as appeal to inappropriate authority. It is an informal fallacy in which the appeal to authority is illegitimate because the authority appealed to has no special claim to expertise on the matter in question. Let us understand this. If a person who is an authority on a particular subject matter agrees with you in your argument on the same subject, then of course your argument will carry a lot of weight. For example, you are learning tennis and you give an argument to your fellow players regarding a proper technique of hitting a backhand. They may hesitate to agree with you as you are no expert but a beginner. What do? In order to strengthen your argument, you write a mail to Roger Federer and explain to him about your idea of the backhand technique. He writes back that yours is a brilliant idea. Now, you tell your friends about Federer endorsing your idea. Now, of course, your friends will agree with you as your argument is strong, as it has the support of a relevant authority. Now, this is about a good argument. Let us now consider another scenario. If instead of writing to Roger Federer on this topic, you asked Sachin Tendulkar, who just happened to be there by chance, and he endorsed your view about backhand hit, would your argument carry the same weight as it did in the previous scenario? Of course not. But why? Because Sachin Tendulkar is a cricketer and no authority on tennis. So, Roger Federer's endorsement gives credence to your conclusion, whereas Sachin Tendulkar's endorsement does not. I guess now you have understood what this fallacy is about. In order to make your argument stronger, you should appeal to a person with expertise in the field relevant to the subject under discussion. One must not be influenced either by majority or by a select few. Popular actors are generally seen in advertisements endorsing products which in their lifetime they would never use. Haven't you noticed top heroes endorsing a detergent powder or a bathroom cleaner? Can you even imagine them washing clothes or cleaning their bathrooms? Actually, we do not even expect them to do so, as these are not their areas of expertise. But that is how the advertising business runs. Now suppose a particular brand of washing powder is endorsed by an expert launderer. What are the chances of people buying that product? Think about it. The thing is, we do not appreciate experts telling us something. We rather envision film stars or sportspersons giving us information. Perhaps that is more effective. It stays with us for a longer duration, and that is why the advertising agencies hire celebrities to do the job. But appeal to inappropriate authority is pretty obvious in such advertisements. Celebrities can be appropriate authorities when they actually use the products they endorse. Advertisers might have become alert that viewers may be laughing at the fallacies, so we see now advertisements for toothpaste by bringing in dentists who explain the medicinal properties of the particular brand of toothpaste. Now, the viewers may be more likely to be swayed as it is the right authority to judge the toothpaste. Of course, these dentists may not be real dentists, but actors. Nonetheless, they sound more convincing than cricketers or actors. However, the ideal situation is that you construct arguments with your own research and understanding without appealing to anybody independently of someone accepting or proving it for you. Knowledge comes to you when you put in effort and work on the details and have justification for your conclusions. When we appeal to the authority of others, we sometimes put a stop to our abilities of knowing and understanding. Anyways, this doesn't always work, as there are many cases where we do require help from experts, and so we appeal to appropriate authorities. For example, suppose your grandmother is showing symptoms of Alzheimer. You take her to a psychiatrist, and upon examination, he diagnoses her with Alzheimer and prescribes certain medicines to her. Then, a few days later, someone advises you to consult a neurologist. You take the advice and get your grandmother examined by a neurologist. Now, the neurologist is of the opinion that your grandmother does not have Alzheimer and takes her off the medication prescribed by the psychiatrist. Now, what are you supposed to do? You, of course, need the advice of the authority on the subject matter. And for this, you need to know who the relevant or appropriate authority in case of Alzheimer is. So you do research and find out that a neurologist is in fact an appropriate authority as far as Alzheimer is concerned. Now, which neurologist is better or more appropriate is again a matter of research for you. However, at the same time, if you start doing unending research on Alzheimer on the internet and try finding cures for it and begin to regard yourself as an expert in the field and disregard the advice of the neurologist, then please know that you are committing the fallacy of inappropriate authority. You are not an expert on Alzheimer. In fact, we see and hear many people doing self-medication based on the information given on the internet. That is too dangerous. And I again repeat that it is appeal to inappropriate authority. It is what we normally call half-baked knowledge. And half-baked knowledge or little knowledge is a dangerous thing. You know that already. How can the knowledge based on spending few hours or days on the internet match up with the knowledge and expertise of a neurologist, or for that matter any doctor, or for that matter any expert in a field that you are not proficient in? As Copy says, recourse to authority is necessary for most of us in very many matters. Of course, an expert's judgment constitutes no conclusive proof. Experts disagree, and even in agreement they may err. But expert opinion surely is one reasonable way to support a conclusion. Now, the third fallacy under the label of defective induction, which is argument non causa pro causa. It is also called the fallacy of false cause. It is an informal fallacy in which the mistake arises from accepting as the cause of an event what is not really its cause. We all are curious by nature, and in this zeal to explain everything, we sometimes end up making false inferences. You know that we have this ability to associate two things that occur together, and we call one the cause and the other its effect. Sometimes we are right in connecting the two by this relation of cause and effect, but sometimes we are mistaken. And this fallacy is about the mistake that we make in establishing a connection between two events or phenomenon. I will start with an example of my friend. This is when we were doing graduation. I would notice that for all the exams, my friend would wear the same dress. And when I asked her about it, she gave a very interesting reason. She told me that her first exam went really well, and because she wanted all her remaining exams to go equally well, she wore the same dress. Can you imagine this thought process? She associated the dress that she wore on the day of her first exam with her performance in the exam. What a crazy connection she fancied between two unrelated things, and which led her to make a defective inductive reasoning. Of course, wearing a particular dress is a false cause of one's performance in the exam. Now, has this example reminded you of any such causal connection which you assumed between events without any proof? Let us understand this fallacy with the schematic representation of it. X is, in all observed instances, associated with Y. Therefore, X is the cause of Y. Before I analyze this argument, I want to introduce you to another variety of false cause, and it is post hoc ergo propter hoc. It means after the thing, therefore because of the thing. Now, in this variety of the fallacy of false cause, we mistakenly presume that one event is caused by another because it follows that other closely in time. I will give the schematic representation of this as well. X in all observed instances occurs before Y. Therefore, X is the cause of Y. Don't these representations clearly explain why and how these are fallacious arguments? Notice that in the first place, there could have been many things which must have occurred before Y or could have been associated with Y. Secondly, just because X occurs prior to Y, it does not establish any causal connection between them. And thirdly, the premises are not sufficient in either of these arguments to arrive at the conclusion. Let us discuss some more examples. A family has shifted into one of the apartments of your building, and from then on, a strange occurrence has begun to happen. Every Monday, the elevator stops functioning. The cause must be the newly shifted family. This would be the inference that you would draw. Also, someone who is born on the same day India got independence may argue that his birth led India to get its independence from the British rule. Now, as far as the examples we have considered so far, the fallacy of false cause is easy to detect. But in some arguments, we fail to recognize it and get misled. I will now give an example from the movie Guide, which was released in 1965. It is based on R.K. Narayan's novel, The Guide. The movie is about Raju, a freelance tourist guide. Some events unfold in his life which lead him to serve a jail term. Upon his release from the jail, he, instead of going back to his people, travels aimlessly and reaches a village. He takes shelter in a temple, and the villagers begin to believe that he is some great sadhu. Now, this village witnesses a severe drought, and the villagers pin all their hope on Raju, who they believe is their savior. Raju, succumbing to the unrelenting faith of the villagers in him, vows to keep a fast until it rains. On the 12th day of his fast, it rains, but Raju dies. Now, the villagers who had a lot of faith in Raju thought and argued that it was Raju's praying and his fasting that was the cause of the rain. However, a person with a logical bent of mind would say that this is the fallacy of false cause, because rain happens due to the development of certain atmospheric conditions. And these atmospheric conditions cannot be caused by somebody's fasting for days. Initially, these conditions were absent, but on the 12th day, these conditions developed and it rained. So this argument of the villagers is definitely fallacious. Now let us move on to the fourth fallacy that comes under the label of defective induction. And it is hasty generalization. It is also called fallacy of converse accident. Hasty generalization is an informal fallacy in which a principle that is true of a particular case is applied carelessly or deliberately to the great run of cases. In other words, the fallacy of hasty generalization is committed when what holds true of a few members of a class is taken to hold true of all the members of a class. So basically, when from the premises we hastily jump to the conclusion, we make a faulty inference. Consider this argument. 3 is a prime number. 5 is a prime number. 7 is a prime number. Therefore, all odd numbers are prime numbers. First, understand what a prime number is. A prime number is a number that is greater than 1 and divides only with 1 and itself. 3, 5, 7 are odd numbers which are divisible only by 1 and themselves only. Now, understand why this argument is fallacious. Clearly the premises are true, but is the conclusion true? No, the conclusion is false. Take the number 9 for example. It is an odd number, but it is not a prime number because it is divisible by 3. Take the number 15. It is an odd number, but again it is divisible by 3 and 5, meaning neither 9 nor 15 is a prime number, despite both being odd numbers. What holds true of a few numbers does not hold true of all numbers. So, on the basis of insufficient premises, a conclusion is reached. And therefore, this argument is a case of hasty generalization. So, a tip for you all. While offering an argument and even while listening to an argument, have patience. Do not show any hurry to reach a conclusion. The universality of the application of the claims made in an argument must not be assumed so easily without justification. We witness people making general claims about the ethnic backgrounds, religious beliefs, cultures of other people with very little knowledge about them. If you perhaps had a bad experience with a Greek, does not mean all Greeks are bad. So, as Kopi says, a single instance may indeed be relevant support for a general rule or theory, but when it is treated as proof of that theory, the generalization is not well founded. The induction is defective. Let us understand with one more argument. This argument is from the owner of a shop who sells fried chicken. He says, I don't agree with any of those doctors who claim that deep fried foods are bad for health. Look at my son. He's been having fried chicken for his whole life. He survives on that. He recently got his medical tests done and all his reports are absolutely normal. Now, something to ponder over. Does a single case provide us with sufficient reason to overthrow the theory that says deep fried food is not healthy? I will leave you with these thoughts today. Thank you so much. Stay safe.